Well, the SPAR group and the retailers gets confronted with the four major crimes that happens: armed robberies, break-ins, safe cuttings and ATM bombings. And it's crucial for us to have a conviction and arrest of the suspects by securing the crime scene and the evidence that was found on the crime scene. This video is not to make you the owner, manager or staff crime scene expert, but it's just to preserve the crime scene and the evidence. Our conviction rate is low due to our handling of the exhibits and the crime scene. For conviction in our court of law, we have to make sure the crime scene has not been tampered with and the evidence that we hand in to court is not contaminated. There's three parts to this video. The first part is when a crime scene has been discovered. We've got a crime scene expert, Andre van der Merwe, that's a forensic investigator that will take you through the crime scene, and common mistakes will be pointed out and how to handle the evidence. We will explain, we've got a crime scene kit for each store. We will make this crime scene kit available to each store owner to use when a crime has happened in a store at a cost. And then the third part is we've got a legal expert, Kevin Pretorius, that's been a prosecutor and he's got his own law practice that will go through handling of the crime kit and evidence in court.
It's a typical crime scene that you'll find, and all crime scenes are the same, whether it's a bombing or a breaking or a robbery. And the golden rule of this crime scene is to preserve it. That's the whole crux of the matter, is to preserve this crime scene as best as possible until the police arrive. Most important, observe. Observe and determine what is different or what is strange in your store, and that will determine where your crime scene is. That's the most important part, is to determine where the actual crime scene is, so you can cordon that off and preserve that until the police arrive. As a first respondent on a crime scene, when you arrive, this is typically what you would see with the door being broken open. Don't touch anything, stay from a distance and take a photo of it so that we can recollect that at a later stage. You've arrived, paramount. You need to make sure that your staff is safe and that you are safe. Don't enter the scene at all if you have any doubt that there might be someone inside the store still or that the situation is dangerous. If you need to enter, make sure you enter with the police or with your security. We've just arrived now on the scene. I've got my security with me for safety reasons and for security reasons. This is now clear that this crowbar that's here is unusual and will be part of evidence. And we don't want to touch it, we don't want to disturb it. But we need to enter this premises now. We're not going to touch anything. If you need to touch anything, use something like a handkerchief, not to touch anything or disturb any fingerprints, or you can use your elbow to just push open the door. We've now entered the store with the security. We've now ascertained that it is definitely a crime scene. Now we have to come out and make sure that the crime scene is preserved and access to it is restricted, and we'll do it in the following way. This is crime scene tape that you'll find in your crime kit that you'll use to cordon off your crime scene area. This will mean that this restricts access to any person beyond this point. The purpose of cordoning off this area is to make sure that all evidence, like cigarette butts or pieces of paper, or anything that's been used by a suspect, is preserved and left in the same position that it was left. We have now cordoned off the area, the entrance. We place a guard right at the entrance, and you leave him there with strict instructions that no one is to enter this crime scene but the police. Once you've cordoned off the outside of the store, it's now imperative to also cordon off the primary crime scene. That will be done now. Behind me you can now see we've identified a crime scene. There are exhibits lying all over the place. So we need to cordon this off and preserve this scene until the police arrive. Right behind me you'll see tools lying around, tools that suspects would have used to enter the area with, and tools for their trade. The hoodie might contain hair of the suspect, and that will be connected or linked to the suspect in terms of DNA, and the same goes for the glove. The flower is placed on the floor, possibly dropped by a suspect, and there might be footprints or fingerprints in the flower that needs to be preserved. A cooling bottle on the counter, empty cooling bottle, possibly used by a suspect, very important for fingerprints as well as DNA. Up to now, we've identified the entrance to the crime scene. Now we've actually identified the primary crime scene. The till drawer and the screwdriver will indicate to us that the screwdriver is used to force open the till drawer. As can be seen with the screwdriver will then positively be linked to the suspect via fingerprints and the screwdriver to the till drawer via tool marks. In this day and age, we all have cell phones with us, with all high-resolution cameras. So it's very important, use those cell phones of yours and take photos as much as possible of the scene before entering it. In your crime kit, you'll find a notebook in which you will record all names of people entering your crime scene, as well as the details of the police that you're handing the crime scene over to. Cigarette butts on the floor, definitely used by a suspect on the scene. Very important for DNA evidence and very important to be preserved. Very common, sometimes evidence is found the next day, especially bullets or bullet heads by staff. Very important not to touch it, and if you need to touch it, there's a procedure to be followed. In the crime kit, you'll find a glove. Put a glove on, use a plastic packet that's for that purpose. Use the glove, pick up the piece of evidence, place it inside the plastic packet, and record exactly where it was found. The first thing you'll do is you'll take your packet, mark your packet and say what was found and where exactly it was found and the date and time it was found. We don't want to contaminate any evidence or exhibits found. So we put on a glove so that all fingerprints that's on the exhibit at the moment remains that of the suspect only. If for any reason you have to enter the crime scene, in order not to contaminate any footprints, what you would do is use this elastic that's inside your crime kit, put it around your shoe. So what will happen is every step that you take or every footprint that you leave will have a distinct line through it. And that will show that it was your footprint and not that of a suspect. The actual marking of the exhibit is the primary function of the SAP. And this is what the SAP would normally do. They would mark a specific exhibit. In the crime scene kit, you'll find these marked cups. That's primarily used to identify exhibits with on the scene, especially small exhibits. It's not easily visible. Under normal circumstances, the SAP would use these cups to mark exhibits for reference at a later stage. Important for you as a store owner, we will encourage you not to use the cups and not to contaminate the scene or try to identify possible exhibits. Leave this for the South African police to do. You can mention to the police that you have these cups available for their use.
Right, this is a crime scene preservation kit which is produced by Silver Fox Forensics, my company. And this is now for the retailer to use in preserving crime scenes where crimes are committed in their stores. This crime scene bag can be purchased from us at Silver Fox Forensics, and it can be found on our website, or whoever is interested can phone Silver Fox. As you can see, comes in a nice bag that can be stored in an accessible place in your store. You'll see the contents. For SPAR, who works in association with the Consumer Goods Council, they will provide you with this laminated board where you can put all the important emergency numbers that you need. Right, you'll find here we have 4 removable pouches. Right, in this pouch now we have at least 3 sizes of the Ziploc bag, which is used as an exhibit bag. Very importantly, these bags need to then be sealed once you have individual exhibits that are found. And each of these bags then would need to be sealed, photographed. The crime scene kit, as you see, doesn't come standard with a camera. But if you don't have a camera in store, smartphones are the thing. Every one of us have got them, and you must take as many photographs as you can. It has a date time stamp called metadata, and that was going to be able to be used in court to show authenticity of what you find. So you're going to photograph from the first time you actually come into your store where the crime scene's at, and you're going to photograph everything you can, as much as you can, because this is a very important device to be able to be used as evidence in a criminal court. Also, inside the bag, you would have a notebook and obviously your pen, which you, very importantly for the chain of custody, you would actually take notes of what has been found on the crime scene, who has arrived from the police, who was the first responder, and exactly how each exhibit, who handled each exhibit, who bagged it, who tagged it, the serial numbers, and specific notes about who each of these items were handed to, because that will have to be contained and put into a sworn statement to make sure you have the chain of custody. Right, in the next pouch we have the latex gloves, your crime scene gloves. Because you don't want to contaminate your crime scene with your DNA or with your fingerprints, the gloves are here for you to use when dealing with anything on the crime scene, but that's only with permission of the police, or giving this to the police to assist them if they don't arrive at your crime scene with gloves. Here we have the ordinary elastic band. Now you'll ask, why would this be part of a preservation kit? Well, if you've got to walk onto a crime scene that's with the permission of the police, or if the crime scene has been handed over to you, and you want to make sure that your footprints can be eliminated as footprints that you've made walking onto the scene, these bands could be then put onto your shoes, and each of your shoes. And with the police you can say, well, I walked onto the scene, but all of those with the rubber band markings, the lines, are mine. So anybody else, any other foot impressions that don't have the markings which your rubber bands have made on the foot impression, are those then the prints of the perpetrators, and then can be used to be lifted and analyzed later for evidence. These red markers can be used to identify specific exhibits that are lying in and around your crime scene. So you will then use them to be placed over articles or near, so that those can be photographed. Those can be used to protect and to mark pieces of evidence which can become exhibits in a criminal court. Here we have the smaller markers, which can be used to show sequences of evidence that is collected, or generally they're also used to show things like the foot impressions that are made on crime scenes. And you can see there's a medical sequence that is used. Included in the kit is also the standard metric measuring tape, which you can then use to take specific distances or measurements. And generally, obviously, with the permission of the police or to assist the police, you can provide them with this tape. Very importantly, an item which is vital for preservation of your scene, to make sure that your staff or members of the public do not enter your crime scene until the police have actually processed it, made it safe, and you then have access, is your standard crime scene tape, chevron tape, which you then use to cordon off the area that you've identified. This tape can be used to isolate areas that you've identified. For example, if someone has come into the front door of your shop with a crowbar, you're now going to isolate that area, because you know that there could be tool marks from a crowbar, there could be fingerprints, there could be touch DNA, and you don't want that to be interfered with or in any way contaminated. So there you'll form your first preservation of your crime scene. Your next circle that you can preserve is, for example, inside your shop, where your cash register or has been damaged by the perpetrators, and you're going to use this tape then to make sure you've cordoned off an area which might include various bits of evidence that you can see and touch, as well as foot impressions. And from there, the police will then be able to walk in, and their crime scene experts will be able to do what is necessary to process and then remove items once they have sealed it in the exhibit bags. We all want to know, what role can we play to ensure that criminals are brought to book, and that the police get the best evidence from crimes and crime scenes. And in that way, a retailer can play a very important part in making sure that correct evidence gets to the police and to the courts eventually. As a retailer, you can play a very important role in assisting the police in crime scene preservation. Now, the role of the police is to preserve crime scenes, to manage crime scenes, and to collect evidence from crime scenes. Come to your store and you find that crime has taken place. You can play a very important role by, as a first responder, preserving a crime scene. But the type of evidence one can find at a crime scene can vary, but it's anything that you can see or touch. As examples, you can say it's the implements that were used to break into your store, such as a crowbar, a hacksaw, angle grinder. In terms of armed robberies, anything to do with ballistics or weapons, anything that someone also brought onto the scene, the suspects. For example, there's gloves, there's articles of clothing, such as a hat, or their shoes, and then also the stock that they might have touched or moved around. It's not only the items that you see, but it's also all the surfaces that a perpetrator might have touched. The door that he entered or window he entered in. It could be the till that they touched or any of your furniture. The cool drink bottle that the perpetrator might have drank from while in your store. Those are all parts of a crime scene. And why do we say so? Surfaces all have very important unseen biological and chemical clues which have evidential value eventually if correctly managed, processed and analyzed. What can be found on these items? Well, fingerprints. You could have foot impressions that lead into your store. You can have DNA of the suspect in his clothing, or he's touched something, touched DNA. This will all form part of vital links between the crime scene, the tools that were used, and the perpetrator if and when that person is caught. As an ex-prosecutor, I have dealt with many cases where the evidence on a crime scene has been ignored because a perpetrator has confessed to what has happened, and then this confession is seen as that it's good enough evidence to present on its own, and the crime scene evidence is left. When the confession is thrown out for one or other reason by the magistrate, there is no other evidence linking the perpetrator and then the accused to the crime, and that person will then be found not guilty. It is important that crime scenes are used because the science in crime scene will speak for itself. And this type of evidence is not easily contested because of its scientific nature. And therefore, the police and us as citizens must look towards science to ensuring that the best evidence to prove a crime is put before a criminal court. Now you'll ask yourself, but why must I then do the police work? You're not being asked to do the police work. You are working to assist the police. And that is the role that all of us as citizens and businessmen, and by now stepping up and saying, well, let me take responsibility for assisting the police by making sure that my crime scene is preserved, you will play a very important role in ensuring that the best evidence possible is then taken through by the police, collected as evidence, and then brought to court as exhibits or as an analysis if fingerprints or DNA is done. Why must every exhibit be individually put in an exhibit bag and labeled? The reason for this is that the courts, when this evidence is presented by the prosecution, want to know, first of all, that the exhibit that was found at the crime scene is the same exhibit now that is either presented in photographs to court or as an exhibit in court, that the crime scene was not in any way tampered with, or could have been no contamination. This is very important for the credibility of the evidence that you now want to put before a magistrate in a criminal court. You need to be able to have a link between the exhibit that was found at the crime scene, that there is a careful recording that it was photographed, where it was lying, that there were notes taken. That history and so-called chain of custody of every person who handled or preserved that exhibit, that it was properly handled, it wasn't contaminated, and it was properly preserved until the analysis was made on that exhibit.
Thank you very much for watching this crime scene video. I hope this will teach you how to handle a crime scene, exhibits, and this will maybe ensure that our conviction rate increases.